As entrepreneurs, we have a lot of preconceived notions about what the relationship with investors or VCs should be like. And typically, what that means is we think it's going to be an adversarial relationship with them telling us what to do. We think it's a one up, one down relationship where the VC is somehow more in control or has more power than the entrepreneur. And this creates all sorts of, frankly, weird dynamics. It's really refreshing to talk to someone like Matt McCall. Matt is the founding partner at Forge Capital. He's been in the VC business for 28 years, has got a wealth of experience. And he's also someone who is totally committed to his personal growth as well as to the growth of the companies that he works with. So when Matt invests in a company, he also asks them to take on coaching, so to do stuff to help improve themselves. And he has got a ton of resources, ideas, and frameworks for how entrepreneurs can live their best life, how they can be their best self. And so I found this a really, really fascinating conversation because it helped me shift how I think about investors and VCs in a really positive way. And this will help you also reconsider what you think about VCs, or maybe challenge some of the assumptions that you have and how you as an entrepreneur can work most successfully with venture capitalists. So I hope you enjoy this episode of The Conscious Entrepreneur featuring Matt McCall of Forge Capital. So Matt McCall, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Great to be on here. Good to see you as always, Alex. I love it.
Now, Matt, you were the leader of a really impactful panel discussion at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit in Boulder in June. And it was you and Tim Chang from Mayfield Fund and Lisa Mickelson from Flourish Ventures. And what was so interesting, inspiring, and refreshing about that conversation was how VCs work with entrepreneurs. And there's this perception out there that it's always got to be an adversarial relationship, and there's always a one up and a one down in the relationship, and that this is all about we just got to be hard-nosed business people and deliver returns. And in your talk, which was all about putting the human back into what is a human-focused business, I and all the other attendees, we really came away thinking, wow, there's different ways to be thinking about this. There's different ways that we can approach, as entrepreneurs, that we can approach working with our investors and with VCs. And it was very different from what we normally hear out there. And I know you've had so much experience in the VC world, 28 years of investing, and you've backed some really interesting and successful companies. How did you come to understand that the inner work is as important as the outer results that are going to happen for a company?
Yeah, well, so it was a couple of things that happened. One is, I think what what's happened over the last 10 years is there's been a perspective shift. Some is generational, where the Gen Zs are just like, hey, this is ridiculous, right? Some of it are people just doing the work like I've done, and coming to the conclusion that this is the logical solution. And I can give you a couple of thoughts around some perspective shifts, if that's helpful.
Yeah, please. Let's love to hear those.
So I think the first shift is, I think that a lot of, and I've run this by a lot of VCs now, and a lot of them have said, yeah, actually that's true. We believe that, there's this belief that the VC is the overlord, and they have governance and fiduciary responsibility, and they come dropping in on the board meeting, and their job is just to make certain everything's run correctly and everything's going well, right? And if not, they give their advice, move to the left, move to the right, get their tuna fish sandwich, right, sit down, etc. That's a very erroneous perspective. We're not the overlord. We're in the desk seat in the passenger car. We're the passenger of the car. And unless we want to put our hands on the steering wheel, the entrepreneur is driving the car that we're in, and that we have a codependence with them. And the car's going 120 miles an hour down the highway, and there's a big turn ahead. So if you were in that in real life, what you would be doing is you'd be asking, did the driver get enough sleep? right? How are they feeling? Do they have their A game going? Because you're looking at it going, man, when this blows apart, we're all toast, right? I have never had a situation where I'm trying to think through where the entrepreneur was the true driver, was the driving force, and went off the reservation. So now something happened to them, and that company did not end up just as a train wreck, right? So first of all, we realize that it is us and the entrepreneur versus Darwin, not the entrepreneur thinking that they're against us and vice versa. Second of all, whenever you have this kind of adversarial relationship like this, not as peers, but like this, they're going to filter information for approval like one might do with one's parents, right? And so as a result, we're going to be making really important decisions based upon flawed information, right? Instead of saying, these are the issues, could you help me? Let's roll our sleeves up. Let's all be vulnerable here and save the company. There's going to be a lot of positioning, and that truth will eventually come out, but usually about 8 months later when it's too late. Third is it a human business? All we have are human assets, right? So why not focus on the human? And then the fifth one is, if you look at the greatest coaches of all time, and I think that's really the best analog for a VC, is kind of like a player coach of some sort. If you look at Nick Saban, you look at John Wooden, who's probably the greatest coach of all time, 11 according to ESPN, he has 11 NCAA titles in 13 years, will never be touched. And he focused on the process. He has this amazing story where he would bring in the best of the best players, and the first 5 minutes he'd have them learn to put their socks on. Like, no, I came here to do 3-point shooting and to win national titles, and and he says no. He goes, you put the socks on so you don't get blisters in practice. If you get blisters, you can't go to practice. If you can't go to practice, you played poorly in the game. If you play poorly in the game, we'll never win a national title. I don't want anyone talking about unicorn, IPO, national titles. Nick Saban does the same thing. I don't want to talk about Alabama winning a national title. He literally calls it the process. When we practice and you're running a crossing pattern, I want you to run as hard as you can as if we're in the game, not because until the point you get it right, but until you can't get it wrong, right? And so I'm like, well, why don't we apply that to venture, which is focus on the input, and the output takes care of itself. And the input is let's elevate these entrepreneurs to be the highest version of themselves, number one. Number two, the number of times I've been in board meetings and the lion's share of the time is drama. And if the board meeting could have been half an hour and it was 5 hours, right? And there are unsaids and poor commitments. And we'll talk about, the conscious leadership group and all these other kinds of modalities. So you put all of that together in 30 years in the venture business. And I kind of had this moment about 10, 12 years ago where I thought, well, one, I want to have a more authentic relationship where I'm a true partner. What I say is I have two identities with my CEOs. One is as a guide, right? To share both what I've learned on the venture side as well, the coaching side, as well as the wisdom side. And the third is I'm a safe harbor. I want you to know that there's someone in there. We're going to have conversations like, no, you can't go to bed with a chocolate chip cookie. Like that, no, it's not going to happen, right? But on the other hand, I want them to know that I will walk through walls for them because we have a mutual dependency, and let's be honest, they're heroes. Entrepreneurs are heroes at the end of the day. And the only reason why when they're driving that car, VCs we're blindfolding him, we're scaring him, we're punking him, we're doing all kinds of things. And the only reason the car doesn't crash is they're so damn heroic, right? Even with us doing all that to them, right? And so I thought, well, how about get them some water and maybe some chips and do a rest break or something, make certain they're the best driver possible. And it was a long-winded way of saying, I think it makes practical sense. It makes rational sense. I just think it's not easy to do it that way. And so people are much more likely to say, I'm going to invest in 10 companies. I'll have a portfolio. And if you don't work, we'll just replace you. But I think those days are over.
Yeah, we'll go to our defaults, won't we? So the default is I'm going to play the role of a VC, you play the role of an entrepreneur, and we have a sense of how that dynamic is going to play out, and we're never going to really show up and be authentic and vulnerable or ask uncomfortable questions. We're simply going to default into those roles that we might be playing.
And we're just going to quote pick right? So, yeah.
And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. You've done a ton of personal work yourself. I know this from what we've chatted about before. And you're obviously really committed to your growth personally and to that of the entrepreneurs with whom you work. Do you ever come across situations where you're sort of farther along and then you're dragging them with you, and you're sort of having to explain how all this stuff works? What's the level of the average entrepreneur that you're working with, or is that part of your selection criteria and one of the things you're qualifying on?
So Forge is a very interesting model in that almost every single check I write has a coaching contract with it. I also don't take board seats, so I'm not going to be in a fiduciary role. And my goal really is to be the guide and safe harbor in the boardrooms for them, and have conversations. At this point, I'm 600 books of wisdom in 10 coaching platforms. So I'm guessing that I've done every assessment test under the sun. I now need an intervention at this point. But I think Jerry Colonna was the one who said it best to me. He said, "Matt, save yourself and let everyone watch." Right. And we can talk a little bit about my journey and why I'm so dedicated to this. But I don't think the entrepreneurs, either because of age or just because of time commitment, have probably done as much work. So I would assume that at least I can bring some value as a guide. And I would say, by the way, one last thing is, if I did this 12, 15 years ago, I think people would scratch their head and kind of look at me like, why are we doing this stuff? It's almost 100% hit rate. I think everyone knows that they were sold the Matrix, that they took the blue pill instead of the red pill, and they know there's a better way.
And the time is now.
Time is now.
It's happening. It's happening now. Yeah. Now, a quick question, and I want to get into your journey. When you invest as part of Forge and a coaching contract comes along with that, are you doing the coaching, or are you relying on someone else to do that?
So I am doing versions of coaching. I'm very enthusiastic about because I know a lot of very good CLG coaches and reboot coaches and other resources. But I do monthly. Like, if you look at my engagements with my entrepreneurs, I've got one this afternoon. Every month we sit down and we go through literally all of the coaching tools. A family of origin, Enneagrams, strength assessments, culture exercises, what's your values, where are your strengths. Everything that I would do as a traditional coach, I do as a VC, but I do it from the perspective of making them the highest version of themselves so we can have the best success with the company.
What's your Enneagram?
I am a 3/7. So, okay. The 3 is what got me into trouble, overachieving. So
the achiever is the 3.
Yeah, that and the 7 is the visionary.
Got it. I'm a 5. So I'm an investigator. Yeah.
Data.
Yeah. Now tell me, what is it that makes you so committed to this? How did you get here? And how did you decide that this is what I'm going to do?
In my household growing up, there were 2 factors that influenced me very heavily. The first was my mom actually was at Sarah Lawrence when Joseph Campbell was teaching. So the hero's journey was the language we used in our household. We watched the Bill Moyers interviews, all of that. And let's be honest, entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur's journey is the hero's journey. And so I became very well versed in all the steps. The second thing that happened, it was just, mom got pregnant, dad got cancer. By the time I was 8 months old, he'd passed away. We left New York and I grew up in La Jolla with one of the most brilliant women I've ever met in my life, photographic memory, but society said your job is going to be raise this little boy here. And so I knew that she would be happy when I succeeded. And so starting in third grade with honor roll, I went hard after the blue ribbons. I didn't get one varsity letter. I got 11. I didn't get one department prize. I got 4, 5, history twice. It was always the top school, the top this, the top whatever. And that's what I call the blue ribbon addiction system. I learned very early on that I would get approval and I would get success in life if I was on the hedonic treadmill. Problem with every addiction system is it gets more and more exponential with each win. It's one thing if you're one of 3 million soccer players getting a participation prize. It's another thing if you're trying to be, a top 100 VC or whatever it happens to be. It starts to get in, and there's a luck factor to that. But if your happiness is dictated upon that, and the other thing that is interesting is on that curve are nodes when you achieve. In between those nodes, you're not happy, right? You need to get the next node, and then you get it, and you're happy for. I teach the Good Life class at universities, and I say, your junior year and beginning of senior year in college, who here was happy? And people are like, we just were heads down trying to get into college. I'm like, great. And then you got into college, and then what happened then? We were happy for, and it's literally, they say the same thing every time, 1 week. And then, boom, on to the next win. And I say to them, do you think that's a good life? That you literally spend it head down, not present, not connecting to people to get the next blue ribbon. You get it with 6, 8, 12 months of work. You enjoy it for a week, and now you're on to the next challenge. Until you miss, by the way, a blue ribbon. You don't get the promotion, right? And then all of that comes crashing down. And so what got me on this journey was, probably about 12, 15 years ago, I'd had a particularly good exit. And I should have been ecstatic. And the emails were coming in, and what an amazing job. And I was just numb. And my adrenals were gone. It was that cortisol test was a little spiky. It was just flat on the bottom. It took me 4 years to rebuild it. And I looked around, and all of my other friends who were blue ribbon, like really good alpha killers, alcoholics, suicide attempts, drugs, you anesthetize in order to allow you to be unhappy in that gap for the next win, right? And that's when I just began to think, God, there has to be a better way. And I was fortunate in that in 2011, I had seeded this great company called Heroic, a guy named Brian Johnson. And he summarized 600 of the greatest books on wisdom, from Upanishads to Aristotle to The Way of the Seal, Matthew Walker on Sleep, all of it, and created kind of a framework of what is the good life based on the Aristotelian eudaimonic framework. And the Navy SEALs are using it now. The Yankees are using it now. I mean, you've got a lot of the top organizations starting to use his Heroic framework. And so he really became my Dharma partner, just teaching me what 2,500 years of wisdom have said. And it hasn't changed. I mean, a lot of it is just resurfaced Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas resurfaced it. Viktor Frankl resurfaced it. Maslow's hierarchy is literally that. The Seligman positive psychology motion literally has the Aristotelian virtues at the top. And so as you start to lean into, well, what in the hell is this? It's a really simple formula. And I'm like, God, why don't we teach, when kids are 3 this versus you'll get parental approval if you get the straight A's. Else, and it comes from a place of love usually, but it ends in tears. And I was just talking to, I've been talking to a lot of like the star basketball players lately. We've been doing a bunch of events and bringing in like Draymond Green, people like that. All of them have had the same journey I did. And Steph Curry keeps coming up as this amazing, role model. We can talk a little bit later about kind of him and everything I've heard about how he approaches life. And he really is embracing the Aristotelian concept. So and actually seems to be not only enjoying it, but everyone that comes in contact with him also seems to get co-elevated, as Keith Ferrazzi says.
So what's the core of the Aristotelian ethic there that caught on for you?
It's a very simple concept. So in a traditional blue pill model, that's what, who was it, at Harvard? He calls it the anxious achiever. I think it might be Brooks's class on happiness at Harvard. He calls it the anxious achiever. And the anxious achiever is, at the pinnacle, is an external validation, comparison to others. You focus on the outcome, not the process. And everything is done in honor of yourself so that you look good, that you're liked, that you're accepted, that it's you. And by the time, the other is a servant leader model. And the servant model is the Aristotelian concept, which is the highest version of yourself. I heard a great talk. I was talking just 2 days ago to Tim Tebow, who's Tebow, who has had quite the journey himself, right? Arguably one of the greatest college players that then didn't ring the bell in the pros. But now he's like this iconic figure in sex trafficking. And he talks about God for him being that highest version. And he tries to get as close as he can to, that this could just be that voice inside of you that simply says, hey, we're not supposed to do this right now. Like we could be better. We could be a better husband. We could be a better venture capitalist. We could be a better soccer player. We could be a better what? And you say, great, what does that look like? And so the idea is that that Aristotle simply said, happiness is actually not happiness. It's called eudaimonia. It's good soul, to have a good soul. And I'm like, God, that feels so great. Like, doesn't that feel good to you? Like having a good soul? And the idea was every day, if you just close the gap 1%, you're never going to reach this. And by the way, it's going to be this in every aspect of your life, right? As a husband, as a friend, as a parent, as a whatever. So he said there are 4 virtues. There are 4 tools by which you become that higher version of yourself. The first is curiosity and wisdom. And it's a simple question. How can I become the best or a better version of myself as a husband or this or that or whatever? Right? That's the first thing. The second is curiosity. The second half of that is curiosity, which is when something doesn't go your way, instead of ego saying, I told you so, you suck, we are not enough. You go above the line and you're like, curiosity, what can we learn here? Like, I think I just got some data that can help me become a higher version of myself, right? So that's the first one. The second one is mastery and discipline. Do you actually, once you've said, hey, a better version of what's one thing I can do and one thing I can stop, the Brian Johnson stuff in Mastery. Everyone download Heroic. Great book on Arate about to come out. Can I close that 1%? But if I've said that, great. Now do I do it? Do I get up in the morning at 6:30? I said getting up at 6:30 is going to be the thing I need to do. Well, are you doing it? Every Thursday, I'm going to go out on a dinner with my spouse, and I'm going to leave the phone behind, or whatever it happens to be. Do you actually do it? The third is courage. It is scary doing this stuff, right? When you're doing something new, your nervous system is on fire, right? And that was Aristotle's favorite, but my favorite is the fourth one. I think if you don't do this fourth one, everything else is for naught. And that is love. It's in service to someone else, to something higher than yourself. I will tell you that it is physically impossible to have a bad day in service to others. And in fact, just one of the coaching hacks you do, if you're having a really shitty day and trying to get unstuck, just go out and help a random person. And you're going to get an oxytocin hit. This is a dopamine, like, the dopamine system is a dopamine based. Oxytocin and serotonin is this servant leader idea. Now, my entrepreneurs, when I've talked to my CEOs about this, they're like, well, that's all great, but what's this love thing? Like, don't you know I'm in the Darwinian, mosh pit here, right? And I give a really simple example. I say, okay, when you get up in the morning, there are two ways you can look at your customer. The first is you need to do whatever you can to pimp them to get them to give you revenue. And if enough of them give you money, you then can get the house in Aspen. And you don't really care because it's for me. It's for me and having the house in Aspen that I am doing this. And I need to be a unicorn and I need to have $1 billion valuation and all this other stuff. The second is you do jobs to be done. You do whatever market discovery you're going to do on the customer, and you realize that they're trying to make progress in their life in this domain. They're trying to get back Tavala, right? Tavala is one of my companies, amazing CEO, David Raby. And the promise is, they send you the food. It's a smart oven. It's all integrated. And you get half an hour. You get amazing food, but you get half an hour back to be with your family because you don't have to cook and you don't have to do dishes, but it's good quality food, right? And so if you say, okay, I am maniacally going to build a company that allows families to spend as much time together and bond around food and have amazing dining experiences together. And that is what drives you 18 hours a day, which is what drives David. Yes, you're going to have rough days where your ego is going to trigger and do all kinds of things. But that's very different than, God, I need to get to $500 million in revenue because I'm not going to get the valuation I need to get, right? The approval. And so if you get up in the morning and you're like, I'm out to reduce the suffering, to create more joy, to bring something in my customers' lives, that's what I mean by love. Same with your employees. There's some CEOs I've been with where like these employees are a pain in the ass. Like, if I could do this without them, I would. But then there are others who are like, you know what? This is family. I have this ability to like elevate these people to guide them to become higher versions. This is what Steph Curry does with all the basketball players on the Golden State Warriors. I can co-elevate together. That's love, but that's also competitive advantage because, right? Who wants to work for that second company versus the first company? Who's going to hit the products? Who's going to have a better product? Who's going to have a more efficient company? So this is where everything I'm talking about is yes and. This is not because this is, quote, the right thing to do or whatever. I think it is, but it just makes common sense.
So this all really came together for you in the VC world, in the investing world. And, by the way, even though we're coalescing around the theme of conscious entrepreneur, we are not talking about, a bunch of barefoot hippie people doing small stuff. I mean, your background, you've been an investor in all sorts of really successful companies. And so you've seen that, and you've seen, what it takes to grow a company like Facebook or Coinbase or Dollar Shave Club or
Mm-hmm.
Talk, like really well-known big companies whose products we use every day. And I heard you say that this is a competitive advantage. So having awareness and using these tools is a competitive advantage for the CEO himself or herself and the company. And on top of that, I've also heard you say that if you don't do this stuff, so if you don't invest in your well-being, if you don't invest in mindfulness and awareness and consciousness, the way that you've put it before to me is if you don't do this, you will die. And so that's a pretty black and white view of the world there.
And we've all been there. It is, I'm now also, in addition to being addicted to wisdom, I'm also addicted to talking to sports figures that have retired. Because,
everyone needs a hobby, Matt. Everyone needs a hobby. Sure.
I am just so intrigued because that's like the entrepreneurial world, right? It's scarcity. There's only one slot. There are winners, there are losers. It's very quantitatively driven. And I was talking to one of them yesterday, and he was, a two-time defensive player of the year in the NBA. And at one point he imploded, absolutely imploded, to the point he was suspended for a year from the league. And when he came back out the other side, guess what he embraced? He was doing breath work. He was doing meditation. He had a coach. He had therapy. He was focusing on his teammates. He was like, and now what does he evangelize? This with up and coming players.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so this is no longer the winner take all megalomaniac. I can do this myself. I'm going to operate in a silo, lone wolf, me against the world sort of thing. He's, I presume, totally changed how he sees himself and his position in the world. Is that right?
He almost died. At one point, he said he was driving to a game and he had an anxiety attack that was so hard because ego was like, we've got to win. We got to get the whatever. That he pulled over the side of the road and he said he just was unable to get to the game for 2 hours. He just literally missed the game. And we've all had those moments on a Sunday night. And by the way, what launched this whole thing is we interviewed 10 years ago, 100 entrepreneurs and said, how do you want your VC to show up to be most helpful? And number one by far, they said, I don't trust any of you guys, but if I could trust you, it was who can be there on a Sunday night when the demons are running through my head? And I thought, shit, this is, we don't have any of that in our stack right now. But it's not easy, right? The framework I use, by the way, that really seems to resonate with my entrepreneurs is what I borrowed from, you know, I've talked a lot about this because I borrowed it from the Lyme community. I have 2 kids with Lyme disease. And it drains you and you say, okay, I've got 10 spoons of energy today. How do I want to spend today? And we'll say, like, do we want to go out to dinner? I don't have the energy. That would be 2 spoons. I can't do it. Well, that's an entrepreneur, right? They've got only finite amount of energy. Where do they want to spend it? And so I say to them, hey, you know, it would be a safe assumption to say, like, the Sunday scaries and all this kind of stuff. You probably lose at least 2 spoons for old shadow work and things that are going on in your own head. You're stuck in the maze, right? You know, as Phil Stutz always talks about, and you can't get out. I said, yeah, that's probably about right. I said, would you say there's probably some drama and dysfunction in your firm where there are unsaids, people aren't taking accountability, there's gossip, there's blame, there's political infighting, and none of it is productive. In fact, just the opposite. It's like an energetic tax. And they said, yeah. I said, how many spoons? So if we're down to 8, and I'm trying to get it in here. Here we go. So if we lose 2 for internal, I said, how many spoons? And I'll say, that's good for 3 to 4 spoons. Like I spend the lion's share. Like when you were a CEO, how often are you spending it on this stuff, Alex, would you say?
I mean, those unspokens and those energy drains can easily consume half of the day.
Right. So now we're down to 4. So first of all, that's it. And now let's throw in some board dynamics. Okay, that's good for 1 or 2. So, like, is this how you literally want to run a business? In the most Darwinian world where half the companies go under. Half go under. So again, this is just kind of common sense. It's like, again, these entrepreneurs are so heroic and so good at what they do, even with getting punked by their VC and having only 3 spoons of energy, they still build amazing companies. Like, I don't know about you, but that would literally be like Michael Jordan winning the slam dunk contest with like a 50-pound weight around his waist, right?
Yeah, no, the way that I'm thinking about it is, you know, we're putting all these demands on an entrepreneur and he or she's got 30%, they're at 30% of their capacity because 70% of it is blocked by something else. And so the work of becoming more aware, doing personal work, becoming more mindful, learning to meditate, learning tools and frameworks for communication and so on. Those are about increasing the amount of available energy that I have to do the things that I love. And if I'm not focused on it, then I'm just burning myself down. And that's what leads to burnout, collapse, companies going poof, you know, and so on if I'm not doing it. So the link here for me is super, super clear. And I really appreciate the examples that you're using because they come to life. I still struggle I mean, even when we're doing Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, okay, I still struggle. I have CEOs who I know here in Boulder who are running successful companies and they're doing great stuff. And they look at me and they're like, yeah, but can I really take 2 days off to go do this stuff? Right? Can I really spend 2 whole days away from my company to work, to do mindfulness and to work on community? And when I say that, I'm like, man, my website's obviously not working to convey the value here. They're certainly not getting it. So there is still resistance I'm finding out there, even though it seems so fluid and obvious when I speak with you.
So there is an element, and again, I'm stealing from Jared Colonna, who's up in Boulder. Former VC. What an amazing human being. And he says, he asks these entrepreneurs, do you really believe if you lose your fear, you lose your drive? Because ego is going to tell you, you will die, right? If you do this, you will die. Now you listen to Stephen Covey, 7 laws of, etc. And he says, if I was given, if I was given like 7 hours to cut a tree down, I'd spend 6 of it sharpening the blade. Right? And then boom, 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 chop away and down goes the tree versus a dull blade. And by the way, the research, so everything that I've done is so deeply embedded in research right now. Because as a VC, I can't, hope's not a strategy, right? And so, for example, I'm not going to tell an entrepreneur to do something like, for example, I can't say, hey, meditate because it seems like it's the right thing to do. There are 10,000 studies on cognitive functioning, decision making, everything. Get more sleep, get exercise daily. Like what do they say? Half an hour of like zone 5 training or zone 3 training is equivalent to 2 Prozacs, right? So all this stuff is so deeply embedded, not just in like it's been around for 2,500 years and still surviving, but literally thousands and thousands of university studies have supported it. But an example I use, I was talking to a really close friend. I've known her for 30 years. She's a CEO, not one of my CEO portfolios. She's a serial CEO. And she's like, oh my God, I am just so exhausted right now. I said, oh, what's going wrong? What's going wrong? And she said, I don't have enough time in the day because I'm getting all the customer success calls. I said, well, don't you have a customer success function? And she goes, yeah, but they're not really quite executing the way they're supposed to. And it's just easier for me to take the calls and the emails and address them. And I said, but it's killing you. And also, you're not able to focus on culture and strategy and selling new deals or any of that, right? She goes, yeah, you're right. And I said, well, have you actually sat down with them and had have you created a clean agreement with them, what their job was and what needed to happen and what was not to happen and what was going to happen by what date? She goes, yeah, but that's just such an uncomfortable conversation in this scenario because of X, Y, Z and the personality involved and all of this. And I said, well, so it sounds like you've got a lot of unsaids. And I said, when you have an unsaid in a company, a couple things happen. First of all, you start to detach from that person, right? And then eventually you start to resent, right? And then it gets worse from there, right? Marriages are like this, right? If you have a marriage and you have all these unsaids, the unsaids are what often kill the marriage. It's the same thing within a company. And now you're not engaging with the person in product that you need to, or the customer service. And what do you do? Because it's an uncomfortable conversation. It's an unconscious, you're unconscious. You're not intentional. I said, if I were you, I'd have really clean agreements and get rid of all the unsaids. And I'd sit down with them and I'd say, hey, you know what? I just want you to know this is what's going on in my life. I'm getting all these calls and I'm not very happy with it. And the story I'm making up is the following regarding you. And that's not a good story. And I know it's not the true story. And what I want to do is have a clean agreement with you that this behavior will happen, that you will do the following, you'll prevent these coming in, you're going to put these methods in place. And as a result, I'm going to get that time back. I'm also going to feel much better about that person. And by the way, they probably were unaware of it, right? That's usually the case. They were unaware of it. And now, because of my advice, they're actually better at their job. But that's the kind of drama and energy tax that we talk about. Like the one that is really interesting, the Conscious Leadership Group is their favorite one, I think, is take 100% responsibility and no more. It's a simple move. Hey, wow, that launch did not go well. I will take responsibility for this piece. I could have done this better, and you all, I think, could have done this better. We don't have those because those are uncomfortable conversations. So what we do is we go back and we blame, right? Those assholes over there are not doing their jobs. The problem is the processes that were in place that resulted in this not happening because no one took responsibility, they're not going to work and change them. So that crap is going to stay in the firm on the next product launch. And by the second or third product launch where that crap is still going on, everyone in the firm then begins to believe the firm can't do product launches. Right? So this is when I talk about like you going from 10 down to 3. This is the kind of stuff that gets you down to the 3. No one's talking to each other. No one trusts anyone. Right? And that's what conscious means. Conscious just means I am aware. I'm making intentional decisions. Right? I am aware.
These tools that you're talking about they're so resonant with me. So you're just in those examples you're sharing, you're talking about above the line versus below the line. So identifying where am I and how am I showing up? And this is the very powerful model from the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. So where am I there? You're also talking about the roles of villain, victim, hero, like which one, where am I in that drama triangle, right? Oh, it's her fault. Oh, it's my fault. Oh, this, that, someone's stepping in to save the day. We all have natural tendencies that will just gravitate back into, right? We'll just go back to the what's natural for us. And then I also heard you talking about nonviolent communication. So observations, feelings, needs, requests, OFNR, which, by the way, I learned from Jerry Colonna. And so that is something that, most companies, most leaders do not have these tools at their disposal, or they don't bring them up when they need them. They resort to, what's my baseline? And if my baseline is below the line, then I'm blaming, criticizing. I'm not saying the things that I need to get off my chest, or I'm not communicating in that way. I'm holding resentment. That resentment is turning into contempt. All that is taking up at least 7 spoons of energy, right, for the average person. And so I guess the question is, how have you seen it be successful to get these adopted at the CEO level, at his or her executive team level, and then percolated throughout the company to really get to their full potential, to really make the change that they can be made?
So the good news, what I often say is, I said, if you want to know what your childhood patterns are in your shadows, become an entrepreneur, and within the first week, you're going to know them. Right? So you're going to be in an environment of scarcity, right? Because that's what entrepreneurship is, right? You're not a large cash flowing business. You're going to have surprises. It's going to be difficult. And when that stew occurs and you've lost the cost count, or your CTO left, or Alex, how many
all that
times
shit happens? All that shit happens all the time. Yeah. It's like a constant, just, who knows what's going to happen. One surprise after another, one step forward, 2 steps back sort of thing. And yeah, you're right. Everything just like boom, starts exploding. So for me, just to share, some of the things that popped up for me were like conflict avoidance, right? So what are the 10 ways I can do this where I don't have to go have a hard conversation or I don't have to really say what's on my mind? Like, how are the ways that I can just whitewash all this stuff with something that came up for me?
I want to be liked. I want to be liked.
I want to be liked. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that person. Another one that came up for me is like worthiness, unworthiness. Okay.
Yeah.
And so like, oh shit. Well, the customer left because I'm not good enough. This team member is upset, or this person resigned because I'm not good enough. Whew, boom, explosion of all sorts of nasty stuff. So yes, I've lived through all of those, my friend.
And this is where I go back to the Aristotelian concept, that first one, wisdom and curiosity. If that first one is ego driven, I need to be right, and that's what drives me, then you're going to be in a constant state of not enough. And you're going to use that anger and fear and resentment and everything else to drive you. And you'll be like, yeah, let's get out there, you wuss, you fucking asshole. Dad was right. We're never going to be enough, right? All that stuff comes up. And I would say by all means, if that works, do it. By the way, I am I'm a VC, right? So just do it. The only problem is I found it fail 100% of the time. 100%, because we sprint the marathon. We don't sprint the hill in the marathon. Yes, there are moments where you need fear and anxiety. As I say, if you're in a hospital and the power goes out, yeah, fear's a really good driver at that point in time. People are going to die. Get the generator going, right? But you're going to end up like me at best, which is no adrenals, right? Because you're hitting the adrenal system every single time. You're sprinting the marathon and wondering why at the 13 mile mark, you're absolutely blowing up, right? And so this is where I think people, with wisdom, with age, you begin to realize that it really is toxic. And the nice thing about the Zs and the millennials is they've seen this a lot earlier than we ever did. And so when I have these conversations, it's funny. I don't even have to do the preamble anymore. They're like, yeah, no, I get it. What tools are we going to work on? Let's go. Like I want 10 spoons. I don't want 3 spoons. And right now they're having quarter life crises, right? So.
Yeah, because otherwise you're spending your time, talking to their wounded child inside and not getting what you really want out of them, which is a, fully functional person rocking at their full potential and doing great things in the world.
And by the way, we just lost a company that was worth $250 million last year because the CEO hid information from us, even though they probably had one of the best entrepreneurial mentors on the board next to them. And they just sought approval and to look right. And so as the stuff was occurring over 8 months, just hit it, moved it around. Don't look over there. I'm actually doing an amazing job as a CEO, right? And then next thing you know, we were 60 million in the hole of liquid with a month to go. And
wow.
Like, you realize we literally over 8 months could have gotten us to break even. Like, this didn't need to happen. And his thing was, I don't want to show weakness. I don't want to show vulnerability. I'm not going to have these conversations. He could have turned to the board member right next to him and said, you've built 3 iconic companies, literally like in this area. In your sleep, you could help me. Did not. And then as a result, we literally gave the company away. Chapter 7. We were either chapter 7 or give it away.
Wow.
And I look at this and I go, these are childhood patterns. There's a saying behind every successful CEO is a 5-year-old trying to get their parents' approval. It's true. Just we're not aware the AI is running.
Yeah, we're stuck in automatic. I've heard you talk before. In fact, at the panel at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, you were talking about some of the superpowers of great entrepreneurs. And you were talking specifically about vulnerability, which we've just talked about, candor, which is telling the truth that we just talked about, and then empathy. We haven't talked very much about empathy. So tell me about how those three are alive for you.
Yeah, so it's funny when you think about entrepreneurship, and I teach entrepreneurship as well at schools, at universities, or mentoring at Techstars. At the heart of a lot of just running a basic business is this notion around human-centric design for your customer, right? And if you look at the IDEO, D School, any of the human-centric design models, they all start with empathize with your customer, right? Get into their shoes. Because what are you building product for if you don't do an empathy map? And so literally I teach how do you do empathy mapping? How do you get in your customer's shoes, understand their journey, understand their emotion, understand their moment of struggle and what's really important to them, and then design your product from that perspective. Where you get into trouble is you have technologists that have an amazing technology. They create the technology and they talk about the features and functionality, and then they just push it out towards the client, the customer, and they wonder why it doesn't sell, right? The client doesn't want 0.5% faster response rate or whatever. Yeah, I mean, that'll affect their effect. But what they want is to be able to get, I'm making this up, an Uber at below $30 to get home to see their family in the most seamless fashion possible, right? We're all just functionally trying to make progress in our lives. Jobs to be done. So it starts with empathy, number one. Number two, how do you manage people? If you don't understand your employees and what drives them, how are you going to show up as a leader for them, right? I mean, you could create a prison warden situation, and that's basically what happens. Your alternative to not having empathy for your workers is you become a prison warden. And by the way, that does work, and it's exhausting. And it works until it doesn't work, and then it really blows up. And so I think the other thing is, if you want to problem solve, if you want to negotiate, if you want to do anything, what's the first step? Empathy. Get in their shoes. So I go back to empathy and vulnerability. By the way, the beauty of vulnerability, this is Keith Ferrazzi does this so well. He does exercises on this. He did it at our CEO Summit. He keynoted our CEO Summit. And he says, when you're vulnerable, you give the other person permission to be vulnerable as well. I would go one step further. If I'm vulnerable and you're vulnerable and we're actually talking about things that are really affecting and influencing us, now we're making decisions on the stuff that matters. If I don't tell you what is going on inside and you're guessing and you guess wrong, you are going to make decisions that probably could be tragic for the firm or tragic for our relationship or tragic for whatever, just simply because you don't have the right information. But we're taught that if you don't put the armor on and show any kind of weakness, you will die. Again, remember, we keep dropping back into the amygdala and the reptilian brain and all of these things. And, look, we were taught by our parents in the most loving way. The world's a dangerous place, and, you need to be careful and thoughtful, and you need to be a survivor, and you need to all this other stuff. So I'm not saying go out there and hug trees. I mean, that'll probably get you killed. But what I am telling you is you will die a different death if you don't thoughtfully approach life differently. And by the way, I'm in my 50s now, and what really got me going was I just looked at so many of my friends. And now that I'm spending a lot more time with sports figures, this is literally the main topic they're talking about. And because also a number of them also were in the limelight, now they're not. Who are they? What are their values? Who are they as a person? Because everything was a dopamine-based system based upon accolades external. We just happen to have smaller versions of that in our lives.
I love that this conversation is happening. And I think the time is right for a bigger conversation like this. I think it's time for VCs and the entrepreneurs they fund to have different relationships and for them to operate more as peers or player coach, as you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And, I like to think that this is all happening now and fast, and in reality, it's not happening as fast as we would like. But, we're starting to get there. And I think this is the magic of what we've done at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, is to have these conversations and to bring people like you up here to say, here's how I view the world. Here's how I think about this as a VC, which is very different from how, entrepreneurs have heard from others, right? We've gotten completely different lessons from other people. Now, Matt, as we start to wrap up here, I've got a couple of things I'd love to dig into with you. And first is, you were at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit. Have you had a chance to define what a conscious entrepreneur is, or what that term means to you?
So a couple of things. One, kudos to you for organizing it. That was a labor of love. I mean, the amount of effort you put in to pull that together was absolutely amazing. I'm still having conversation at least once a week with someone from that summit. How long ago was it?
It was in June, so it was 3 months ago.
3 months ago, right? It was just an amazing experience. At the end of the day, I think the issue for a lot of people is that they just don't know the alternative. Like when I started talking about the hedonic versus the eudaimonic, and like, by the way, here's how you actually build an amazing company that is the best of the best, but you're not dying every single day. They always look at me surprised. And then they go, and I say, here, just try this one thing. And then they try it and they come back the next day and the next day and then, right. And then they just kind of, they suddenly start going down the path. But if we don't have things like the Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit, if we don't have people talking about this stuff, no one is going to realize that there is a red pill to the blue pill, the hedonic blue pill that we've all been trained on. So anyways, so huge shout out to you on this. And as I've said, anything and everything I can do to help you, I would love to do. Conscious entrepreneur is very simple to me. Too many of us live unintentional, unconscious lives. What does that mean? We live reactively, right? We don't feel we have agency over our life. Stuff happens to us. We aren't the architects of our life. We aren't the architects of our company. And what we do is we rely on amazing resources of our own grit and strength and resilience and all these other things to just power through. But the reality is, if we were intentional, if we were really conscious about the decisions we were making, if we were intentional about how we become higher versions of ourselves, and in doing so, suddenly our companies are more successful and we have less effort. We get into flow state, right? It's all about flow state is what we're really talking about here. That is what a conscious entrepreneur is. A conscious entrepreneur is not someone who's like peace, love, joy, whatever. In fact, I've found probably some of the hardest ass people that I've ever come across are in the conscious camp. I'm like, oh, that stung. I was like, you realize if you say that, I need a hug. No, I mean, I'm kidding. I'm the VC too. But no, it is intentional decision making. You're intentional about what your values and culture are. You're intentional about the purpose of the firm. You're intentional about the customers you're going after. You're intentional about the progress they're trying to make in their decisions. You're intentional about any kind of dysfunction or function that you have within the firm. If hey, by the way, you know what? If you want to have a culture of hyper toxic, whatever, great. Just be aware you're intentional about that. You're making that call to sprint that part of the marathon. Great. But what happens is most of us just end up sprinting the goddamn marathon. We're exhausted. We're complaining about how tired we are. We feel like we don't have control over our lives and we're stuck. And why is this important now? We're not coming off of life has a 7 to 10 year cycle I've blogged about at somethingventure.com. Because of the Fed, we had 2 cycles back to back. So we're actually undoing 2 market cycles, not 1 market cycle right now. And that means there's going to be a lot of reckoning over the next 2-3 years. And so a lot of people there's going to be a lot of suffering out there. And so the question is, great, can you be intentional about what's going on? Can you make intentional decisions to get through this? And can you, if you're intentional and conscious and feel like you're agent over your own life, as all of this shit is happening, excuse me, I shouldn't be swearing here. If all this stuff is happening, then you're going to be more resilient and have more grit. You're going to have more energy and you're going to have less trauma. End of story. And so that's a very long-winded way of saying that's what I think a conscious entrepreneur is. They're intentional about everything they do. And as a result, they're architects of their life and they have agency of that life.
Thank you. What do you do? What are your daily, weekly, monthly practices to stay in your zone? So are you a meditator? Do you do, I don't know. I assume you probably have a very long list of things that you do.
Oh, I need an intervention at this point. If it's been written about, I've tried it. But I think the first thing is I've been really fortunate and I've been very intentional, right? Like we either are intentional who the people we spend our lives around with, or it just happens. I have some amazing Dharma partners in my life. People who are also on the journey, they're extraordinary at what they've done, but they think about these things. And we're always testing and comparing and contrasting to each other. So I've been really intentional about who are the people I have around my life. One of them is a guy named Brian Johnson, who's the founder of this app, Heroic, which is a great app. Everyone should download it. It's, think of it as Blinkist for 600 of the best books ever written on wisdom and living the good life. And then he frames it into 101s, and then he has this whole mastery program he runs where he puts it all into the Aristotelian concept. And it literally is, if you want to know what 2,500 years of wisdom have said, here's what it is. So one is, I've got the Heroic app. I pound through that like crazy. But, a lot of the frameworks that Brian talks about are, great. What is that one thing you can do to start? And what's the one thing you can stop so you have better work? Start, stop. Relationship, start, stop. Energy, start, stop. And at any point in time, I have my list of what I'm working on those. Okay, so it's constant growth, right? Growth mindset. So that's number one I do. Number two, number one is the Dharma partners. Be really thoughtful of who are your friends around you. I have a coach, a guy named Phil Stutz. You probably saw the documentary on Netflix with Jonah Hill. So whether you have a coach, a therapist, whatever, it's worth their weight in gold. For me, sleep is really important, and I did not do a good job this week. So it's a train wreck. But, this notion of, is probably the number one foundational element you can have in your life that entrepreneurs are getting much better at realizing they need sleep. That is in bed by 10, up at 6:30, 7 o'clock. I do cold showers. So I'll do a regular shower and then drop it into cold, which is, the whole Wim Hof stuff. Love that. With two kids who have Lyme disease, we have very clean diets. I am not as dedicated as they are, but, sugar-free, gluten-free, dairy-free as much as I can. I'm trying to not drink anymore, but, I've never had an issue with it, but it's just if I have, 1 or 2 drinks, I'm not going to sleep well. And I'm probably not going to feel great the next day. And as Huberman says, there's no study, and Peter Attia, the same thing. There's no study that's shown that even wine is good for you. It inflames. So some things like that. I've been starting to really learn a lot about plant medicine, and I think that is. There's just so much magic coming down. If you look at the FDA trials and all of that right now, so excited. And then I'm always reading. And some of my favorite books, I tell people, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is unintentionally, he ended up in the world's most extreme research lab on how to thrive in life when it's beating away at you. Such an amazing book. Byron Cage is probably the book I give the most to my entrepreneurs is Loving What Is. And the other one is Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. You read those? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Those are absolutely top. Yeah.
And then Pema Chodron, comfortable with uncertainty. Phil Stutz, The Tools is always great. And then the Heroic app is amazing. So
that's a fantastic list, most of which I'm familiar with, and totally agree that those are really valuable for anyone who's going along this journey. Well, Matt McCall, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. I am so impressed with the way that you think about the role of VC. I'm so glad that you are having this conversation and that you are leading us on this path, because what we need more conversations like this. We need more leaders like you. We need more people reframing how VCs and entrepreneurs work together. And so I'm incredibly grateful for your leadership in this area. And it was a really, really fun conversation. Thanks so much for being here on The Conscious Entrepreneur.
Alex, you're amazing. Thank you for everything. Look forward to our next talk.